All right, well, welcome back to the Open Bible, Open Life podcast. As you guys know, I love to bring guests on, and today we have Clayton Greene, all the way from the Raleigh-Durham area. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Was I supposed to bring my Bible?
No, you don't need to.
Okay,
Open Bible, Open Life.
My life is here.
Here it is. Not
I'm
your
open.
Bible, but your life. Now, you came. Now, do you live in Raleigh or in Durham?
Durham.
Durham, okay.
So I'm only an hour and 15 minutes from this building.
So
I should probably come,
You've
right?
considered transferring your membership to Two Cities Church.
Yeah, we were talking about it at home.
Well, I want to hear, I know you, but our guests don't know you today. One of the reasons I'm having you on is because by the time this comes out, we'll have had the second ever,
Yep.
What do we call it? Like, it's not annual.
Collaborative conference.
But what do we, it's every 2 years.
Is that biannual?
Biannual?
I think that's what
every
it's supposed to
other
be.
year
Yes.
conference. So we had one 2 years ago at Mercy Hill Church in Greensboro, one of our sister churches, about 40 minutes down the street. And we're going to be hosting it. What are we expecting? A little over 500 people?
Yeah, so we were like, hey, here's a goal. Let's do 350, but hey, it's two cities. You know, we just went ahead and hit 500.
Come on, 500.
I'm so excited.
And that's over 50 churches. We were talking this morning. So over 50 churches, 500 people. Now, who's coming to this? This is churches in our collaborative, which again, our listeners may not know this. Two Cities Church is part of a collaborative of churches that's swelling, if I can use that word, it's swelling to like 90 churches now.
Yeah, and at the end of this year,
At the end of this year, it'll be 90 churches. We're expecting at least over 50 of those to show up. Many are coming, so sometimes it's going to just be maybe the lead pastor and his executive pastor, but many are bringing their staff teams. And we've got people coming from everywhere from Miami, Florida to Denver, St. Louis, all over. So how did this start? Tell us about the conference.
So the collaborative has existed for 14 years. The Summit Church started planting churches about 14 years ago.
Okay.
It wasn't until about 5 to 6 years after that where we had planted enough churches that we needed to say, hey, what does this group of churches all do together?
Yes.
It was about the time that you were coming through the residency.
Yes.
And so at that time, incorporated as the Summit Collaborative, this group of churches that helps each other thrive and work towards multiplication, primarily working through the leadership of the churches, the lead pastor and the executive team.
Yes.
Then a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, we thought, hey, we need to have an opportunity to get all of the staff to have exposure to the idea of church planting, to what the Summit Collaborative is doing, that we're not just one church in a city, but we are a group of churches that are supporting each other, and the movement is so much bigger than all the different movements of the individual churches. So he said, hey, let's get all the staff together, which is a unique thing we don't always do every other year, and let's do a big conference where we can review who we are and show everybody what's happening in the movement.
Yeah. Well, we're humbled to be the second host ever. I know tomorrow morning it'll launch off. I'm going to give the first talk, and I appreciate you guys giving me the ability to do that. And I'm going to share just a little bit about just how much the Summit Collaborative, in fact, I used to call it the Summit Network when I first joined it years ago. When you first joined it, we'll talk about that. But it has just meant so much to me. In fact, I think often about, like, when I think about big decisions in my life, it's obviously, you're going to think I'm exaggerating when I say this, but there's coming to faith in Christ, there's marrying Margie, there's having my 3 kids, there's probably a couple other things I'm forgetting, but not far down the list, genuinely, for me, is being a part of the Summit Collaborative and getting in that residency, because, and I know this is the story of a lot of guys, there was a desire to plant or to pastor or to lead, and then you're asking questions a lot of guys are asking, well, how do I get connected, and who can help me with resources and funding and relationship and strategy and getting the church. I always talk about church planting is like getting a church into orbit, and it just takes so much energy, so much fuel to get into orbit. Now, let's go back to the original vision for this, because you're wearing a sweatshirt today that has the number 1,000 on it, okay? Right. Tell us, how did the vision, and I'm hoping to have Pastor JD on this podcast soon as well, this week actually while he's in town, he's going to hopefully jump on here, but I want to hear from your perspective, how did we get a vision for 1,000 churches? Because that has been one of the North Stars for us.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't feel like that is an over-exaggeration in terms of that list, because I would say something very similar for myself. Like going to the summit, being a part of actually helping plant a church has really a couple of really pivotal moments in my life as well. But those pivotal moments do go back to like the origination story. Apparently, like lead pastors do, Kyle, sometimes they say things on stage and then everyone's like, well, I guess we got to do that, right? So JD said, like, we're going to plant 1,000 churches in a generation. And it wasn't something that came from a long-term strategic process or a revisioning process for the church. It's just something that God had laid on JD's heart, partially because of his desire to reach the nations. And the 1,000 number just kind of happened probably when he was reading a book, and he gets on stage and he says, we're going to plant 1,000 churches in a generation. The way I tell the story is he walks off the stage and he looks like Mike McDaniel, who used to have my role, but now lives in Denver and is a part of a collaborative church. And he said, all right, let's go figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really how it started. And before that, the Summit Church that is in Raleigh-Durham was giving money to church plants and was encouraging them. But at that point, they made the decision to say, we're not just going to give money and support churches. We actually want to own their success.
That's right.
You were talking about that orbit. Like, to get into an orbit takes a lot.
Yes.
And so they said, we're not just going to like support that. We're going to help put them there and keep them there.
Yes.
So there was one church planted, and then the next year another church was planted, and the next year 3 churches were planted, and the next year 2 churches. And so it just kind of began to grow and swell. And then we're just continuing to like live out that momentum of what happened from like, let's just start owning the fact that these churches need to get into orbit.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about what you do now with the Summit Collaborative. But before you kind of mentioned this, before you are now doing, I'm struggling here. Before you did what you're now doing,
Yep.
You did something else. And so let's talk about how did you get connected? So you're at the Summit. You end up being the executive pastor at the Bridge Church with Ethan Welch, which is a church in Wilmington that still exists. Tell us the story of like how, I want to hear your personal experience of being in this collaborative back when it was the network. You weren't in, I guess, in the residency. Ethan would have been in the residency.
Right.
How did you guys end up planting the church that became the Bridge? And how did the Summit Collaborative help you guys do that?
Yeah, so I was originally trained as a physical therapist, was practicing outside of Raleigh in a city called Fuquay Arena, and God had kind of put a call on my life. Clayton, I've given you gifts, use them. Clayton, I've given you gifts, use them. It was a phrase that I was like repeated in my heart and my mind for a number of months, and then I actually started doing an internship. Not like the full beautiful residency that churches have now and like 2 Cities has, but I was essentially a hired volunteer. And so when I started doing that, I felt like that call went away. And it was like I couldn't repeat it in my head, and I really felt like God was actually leading me into that, to use my gifts in the church. But I was still planning on actually opening a physical therapy practice at the time when Ethan asked me to go to lunch. So we go to lunch, and I'm talking to him about his job that was at the Summit and what he was going to do in Wilmington. And I'd already seen this executive pastor role like when other churches had been planted out of the Summit. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I was always entrepreneurial at heart. I loved the church. I loved the organization of it. I loved physical therapy, but I loved the people problems even more. And so I get to the end of that lunch with Ethan, and he says, well, I want you to move and be the executive pastor of the
And you didn't
church.
see this coming?
No. I go home to Kristen, and I tell her, and she said, well, that's flattering, like, but we're not going, right? I mean, that's crazy. Like, we'd have to change everything. My wife was practicing attorney in Raleigh at the time. And it took about 5 months of us asking all of our friends and family, what do you think? And pretty much across the board, save like maybe 2 people, they said, this looks like it fits you. You should go. And so we moved. And you're right, Ethan.
What year is this?
2014 is when we moved. 2013 is when we said yes. So I leave my job. Kristen leaves her job. We moved to Wilmington. So you're right. Ethan would have been in the residency program, the 9-month program that the collaborative still hosts and lead. We call it the church planting cohort now because you're in residence at your church, but you're doing the cohort with the collaborative. And so Ethan would have done that when I said yes. He was already in that process. When I land in Wilmington, I haven't been to seminary. I have no training other than doing that short internship at the Summit. I have great eldering practice and training from the Summit, so I'm ready to do that. So my training came from a guy named Bobby Harrington, who's actually at Mercy Hill, just down the road, and a guy named Andy Metzger, who's still in Denver.
Yes.
So those 2 guys had gone as executives, and I just would call them. And I'd say, well, what do I do for this? Right? What do I do for this? And so that training was a lot more personable. Not that the residency is not personable, but it was literally I called and I had a problem and we need to solve this. And it was actually early on and while I was still in Wilmington that I think God then put a passion in my heart for what I do now, because I started seeing what those guys had given to me, I wanted to give to the next ones. And so I actually had 2 guys that were becoming executives in the collaborative. I started actually regularly doing calls with them. So rather than them interrupting my day, I would actually just schedule time to meet with them. And I actually did that a couple of times before my family had to move back to Durham because we needed to be closer to Duke and UNC for the medical care there as compared to Wilmington for one of my daughters.
Yes.
But, I mean, in general, it was just like things were getting passed down because the collaborative is really a family.
Yes.
And so calling someone and saying, I have a problem, can you help me with it? Like absolutely fits the training. It's just how formal and how regular are you doing those meetings? But we know that those types
especially
of calls
as
are
it
happening all the
grows.
time.
How do you scale care, development, all of that? So okay, let's talk about your role. Okay, so when I came on, there was a guy you mentioned already, Mike McDaniel, who's now at the Heights Church in Denver,
Yep.
and great guy, and he was doing multiple roles that have now been as the organization grew. Correct me if I'm wrong. Have transferred a little bit. So there's what you do, and there's what Matt Love does.
Yep.
And will you talk about each of those? So what you do and what Matt does, and then from there we'll kind of talk about what this collaborative is and how it functions on because there's what I'm trying to get at is there's the constant recruiting and finding and developing of the next class.
Yep.
There's taking care of that class while it's here and sending them out. And then there's all of the relationships now with almost 90 churches. So I want to get into that, but tell us like, what do you do and what does Matt do? There's Anna, there's others, but like talk about some of the people and roles that go into, because our listeners are listening, they're probably like, what is it? How do you plant churches? Can't just one church plant a church? Why do you need this network and relationships? Talk to us about that.
Oh gosh, there's like 4 great things to talk about in there.
Please.
I'll answer the question about me and Matt. So Mike's role, I would say, was 3 different things. It's developing people who are called into ministry in order to help them be prepared to lead in a ministry. So that we'll call that like the apprentice program, similar to I think the residency that you guys have here. So that then there is leading the cohort. So that is the people that are planting churches right now, and then they're supporting the churches that have been planted.
Yes,
Mike was responsible for all 3 of those. I mean,
those are now 3 separate jobs.
3 separate jobs, and actually that apprentice type program of developing people who have a call to ministry is actually not on the collaborative's plate anymore. So that has gone back, and the Summit Church has someone that leads that at the Summit Church. You guys have someone, Stephen, who leads that here.
Yes.
And so all of our churches, we encourage them to have that. But the Summit Collaborative, we actually help all of our churches support each other, and we help them with the highest level of leadership development with a cohort system that we have. In terms of me and Matt, the simplest way to put it is Matt's responsibility if you have not been sent yet, and you're my responsibility if you have been sent.
Okay.
So if you're already out there lead pastor, or on an executive team of a collaborative church, you're my responsibility. Call me. Mm-hmm. I'm the one that's helping you. I'm the one that's planning things for you. I'm the one that's helping encourage you and help you thrive. If you are preparing, you think you've been called to plant a church, you want to be a part of one, you're in development in one of our churches, then you're Matt's responsibility. That's how you kind of divide it up. It's a lot more gray than that, but that's how we divide it up.
Well, let's take each one of those. Let's start with Matt. We'll get to you. Okay, So how do you guys find, and I know the answer to this, but I want to hear you talk about this. Yeah. How do we find future church planters? Like, how do we? I know early on in the early days, most of them, maybe all of them, for the first few years, came right out of the Summit Church in Raleigh, Durham. Yep. They were people usually like Ethan, like Andrew, like Spence, who were on staff already doing something. Maybe a campus pastor. I know Spence Shelton was over community groups. Mm-hmm. There's an identifying process of like both by the church and by the individual. Hey, I think God might be calling me to plant. I know as we've grown that not all of the church planters. I didn't come out of the Summit. I mean, right. I was over there for a season. But how do you guys find future church planters? And I know that's changing even as how we're trying to build systems and structures within the network.
To dig now, yes. So the history there is, I would say, 15 years ago when Summit started kind of deciding that they were going to own church planting, you could kind of go to people who had been leading a college ministry or leading a student ministry, been an associate pastor for 10 years, and they would say, I've been called to plant a church. Can you help me plant it? Because maybe their church wasn't ready to help them.
Yes.
But still, all of those things in the history of the Summit Collaborative have come through relationships. We say we identify leaders through relationships. And so we knew someone, and we've seen that they have pastored, and they have consistently had the character and competency in order to lead. Okay, let's help them get the final training in order to go. So that's the history there. But what we're trying to do now is to focus more and more on internally developing the leaders that can then go and plant, right? So there are some people who, when they're ready to go plant, they'll raise their hand. We want to help be developing them before they get to the place that they're going to. And we actually have a number of good stories within the collaborative of some people that might have gone too soon, like might have struck out and tried to take too much responsibility before their character and competency were ready for it. And we helped them kind of stay and continue to be developed, and so that they're actually a ready leader whenever we put them into the cohort process and they were able to plant. So the answer of how we're digging to try to find those lead planters now is our assessment process. Mm-hmm. So whenever you're going to plant a church, you go through an assessment process. You would have done this whenever you were planting. But what we've taken is we've taken that lead pastor church planter assessment process and we've turned it into a shorter process for any staff or vocationally called people at any of our collaborative churches. And about 80% of the time that we do that, we put that person on a development plan and they will stay at the church where they are and they'll just be stronger.
Let me pause you. So you're now helping, I know this, but I want to say this out loud. You're now helping, let's call the 90 churches that are now in the collaborative. You guys are creating systems and evaluations to come alongside these churches to say, hey, we want to help you through relationships identify who we think are going to be future leaders, but particularly future church planners.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And 80% of those are going to stay at the church. 80% of the assessments that we do here are going to stay at the church. But we think 10 to 20% of them are going to have the giftings we have a 9-point profile. This is the character competency that someone needs in order to be able to plan a church. We think that they have the makings of being able to be capable of planting a new church. We go to the lead pastor and we say, hey, we think this person can do this. Let's put them on a development plan.
Yeah.
And so we're beginning to see people. So that's when we say we'll talk about the pipeline. We're actually stacking the pipeline where we are working on developing leaders because in the church, we are a people system, right? We are in the people business. We needed to be developing people in order to minister to people.
Yeah. And so we've done my residency when I was in it, or my CG, what's it called now? You guys call it now? Not
the cohort.
The
church planning
sorry.
cohort.
My church planning cohort, it was called the residency when I did it, but the church planning cohort that I was a part of had 7 guys.
Yep.
I've seen it as small as 3.
Yep.
This year, how many do we have?
15.
Okay. So talk about this without getting too much into the future, but at what point do you say, man, there's too many guys? How many guys can a cohort handle?
Yes. We've done
because I know we want to scale. I know we want to plant a lot of
Yes.
churches. Talk to us about that.
Well, the collaborative is a family, which we've said. So we think that cohort table needs to feel like a family.
Yes.
If it becomes a class, then we lose some of the
said.
culture.
Yeah.
And if it becomes a class, I don't think we are giving the development or exposing those future planters to the people that they need to know in order to be sharpened to be the strong leaders that we are known for having within the Summit Collaborative.
Makes sense.
So I think the number is between 4 and 10.
Okay.
Could it be 12? Maybe. But we've got a problem now with 15.
Jesus could handle 12.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
we'll
if we
12.
could. Maybe we can't. Yeah.
So, essentially, think about this. Can we go to a restaurant when we come to Winston with a cohort class and put everybody at a table from you to learn from you?
Yeah.
If it's more than what we can put at a table with you to learn from you, then we've got to consider multiplying.
Yeah. It loses
So
that.
actually, this year, that's what we've done. Is Matt is still responsible for leading both cohorts, but we have 3 different coaches, and the group will go on 2 different trips. So next weekend, there's a group that is going to Charlotte. There's a group that's going to Cincinnati. Lead pastors in Charlotte are helping with the training there. Lead pastors in Cincinnati and Fort Wayne, Indiana, are helping with the training there. So they're doing the same content, like the same information. They're covering the same topics, but we've got to make it small enough so that they can sit with those other lead pastors and learn directly from them, to get their phone numbers, to look them in the eye, because there's something about sitting at that table that calls you to a new level that we just can't lose, and I don't think you can manufacture in a class.
I agree. Okay, so Matt's with them for 9 months roughly.
Yes.
It starts usually in August, ends in May, giving the average planner kind of the summer. Hey, go move. This is how it was when I did it. Go move, get settled. Find your building if you haven't, or find your elementary school, whatever it is. Keep working on your launch team. A lot of pastors are then going to launch that September, maybe as late as January or Easter, depending on their context and their philosophy of ministry. Okay, so now though we keep mentioning this number of moving from 70 to 90 churches, because we're bringing some other churches in who we didn't plant, the Summit Collaborative didn't plant, but they're interested in being and this is where you have to have many things at the table. One of the main things outside of being gospel centered and missions minded is a desire to plant churches.
Yep.
How do you even begin? This has grown a lot under your leadership, but how do you even begin your mindset on how do you care for so many churches? I know you and I are getting a call a couple times a year. I'm seeing you at a couple events. What are some of the ways that you guys are trying to come alongside, let's just call it right now, 70 churches?
Yes.
Like, what are some of the rhythms and patterns and routines that make a collaborative what it is?
So we get together 3 times a year, and that's like the easy structure answer, but it's way more complicated than that.
Talk about this 3 times.
The reason we get together 3 times a year is so that we foster the network of family feel, so that people are supporting each other.
Yes.
When someone calls me I tell them, that's a great question. Here's my answer. Call Kyle.
Yeah.
But I don't only say call Kyle. But
well,
call
it's interesting because I think about, we'll see how this conference is, because I was at the one 2 years ago. This one's going to start tomorrow. With 500 people, that's a lot of people. With our annual retreat, which we also do in April, that's just with lead pastors, executive pastors, and their wives. But that can be 100 people. And so what I found is even in those rooms, people enjoy the talks, they enjoy the breakout sessions, but really what they're wanting to do is they're like, man, I need to get coffee with that guy over there. I need to go sit at the table. I'm feeling that. I get in these rooms and it's such relational environments to keep it feeling small. So what is the third event? So the third event, so we've got the annual retreat, we've got the conference that's going to be every other year. Talk about some of the other ways, even because I think this is really powerful and I think our listeners will appreciate this, the way that you guys come alongside wives.
Yeah, so the annual retreat is every year, and everything else is on like a 2-year cycle.
Okay.
So annual retreat, conference, and then this January we're having the lead pastor huddle, only for lead pastors. Think campfires and confessions, but the campfires are at really nice houses, like not intense. Then we're back to the annual retreat in April again. Next, the fall after that, we'll do something for executive pastors, just specifically for the executive team. And then in February of next year, instead of doing the lead pastor huddle in the early new year, we'll do a wives getaway.
Great.
So that's the cycle. It's 3 events in a year, which we are doing something for all staff. We're doing something for wives, something for executive team members, something for lead pastors, and they're about every other year.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And then the annual retreat is every year.
Okay, so you work with pastors all over in our network, everywhere from, like I said, Denver to Miami to all up and down the East Coast. Help us understand, what are some of the main problems, pains, pressures that you see pastors have? Let's just say in the first 5 years. So in the first 5 years, they're trying to get their church started. You're helping coach them. Like, what are some of the things? Because I know our church cares for we care for our churches, that we've helped to plant. What are some of the things that continually come up? Are you seeing patterns? Like, man, as we plant churches, maybe it's something on the other side of COVID. I don't. What is it?
Well, so how much does the church know about how much you support all of the churches? So everybody listening, Kyle does an amazing job of supporting the new churches as well as churches that have existed for a little while, and will actually get away with some of them. Yeah. So I'm sure you have a great answer to this question as well because you understand their pain points. I would say when I call guys, I had a list of 5 questions, and we'll see if I can get all 5 of them. All right,
let's see.
They didn't alliterate, which is my problem.
If
they would have alliterated, then I would have gotten it.
You're not a good Baptist.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a home that your family feels comfortable in? If you move to a new city, like just getting a place that your family feels like is a
I love
home.
it. That's a great question.
Number one, right? Number 2,
because that's going to be a happy kids, happy wife. Absolutely. That's going to be that's good.
Right. Number 2, is your paycheck coming, and are you worried about it? Right? I mean, there's fundraising whenever you're going into planting a church.
Are you thinking about money so much it's distracting from everything else?
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're worried about that, you're not going to be able to focus. I'm sure you would say this when you get away with guys. Man, you got to put your head on this. You have to focus and give all of your energy to planting a church. It's a hard thing to do.
Yes.
And it's a spiritual thing to do. It's an organizational thing to do. It's a ton. But if you're worried about your paycheck, you're not going to be able to do that. So you got to have a home. You got to make sure your paycheck is coming. Do you like your kids' school? If your kids are school aged, whether they're home or they're in it, like, because I hear this pain point more so in cities than when someone plants in a city than when someone plants in a sprawling suburb type of place where the schools are maybe just a little bit harder to find something that works. So school, do you have a place to gather? And is it a sustainable place?
So that's for
to
your
gather?
church. Yes. Yeah. Well, how's your current facility? Is it actually? Can you do ministry in it? Yeah.
Yep. And then, do you have Kyle Mercer's phone number? I don't remember number 5.
You don't remember the 5th one.
I don't remember 5. But because if we put a lot of work and a lot of effort and resources into equipping a lead pastor, to identifying and equipping a lead pastor to go lead.
That's good.
So if we can get that lead pastor to sustainably be in a city and to do that work, what we see is that with the support of the family to help that church thrive, that most of the time that church can thrive. And planting a church is a very hard thing to do. So essentially, those things that I hear them struggle with, or the things that I want to make sure is in place for them, is built on, if we got to get this missionary to be able to live in their target area and to do the work that we've trained them to do. And we have seen God really bless that.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your guys' emphasis on the family, because what I've seen, to use it kind of an extreme example, but this was actually not somebody in our network, but I was talking to a church planner in New York City. And one of the things he said is, it's very, very hard for the wife to make it through the second winter. And he said, what happens is you get up there and the wife's like, our house is like a tenth of the size it would be if we were still living in North Carolina. Let's make up a place. And we don't have, he said, unless you have a lot of money, you don't have a washer and dryer. And so imagine you're in, some part of New York City and you've got 3 young kids and the wife's got to go down across the street every time she has to do laundry. She has to feel cold. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. She has to, because I think a lot of times the husband can feel like, I'm stereotyping, the husband can feel like, I'm here, I'm accomplishing the mission, and the wife can feel, I've heard this from missionary wives too, I'm doing what I would be doing anywhere I lived. And living here just makes it more difficult. Yeah,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so
or I don't like it, or living here I don't have my family.
Yes.
So those things are very important whenever you fix it. You pick a place in order to plant. We're seeing more and more people plant in their hometowns.
Yes.
And I think that can be, we still need people to go to hard places and to go to the laundromat across the street, right? But the first 3 years, the second winter comment is a good one. I would say the first 3 years, because it just takes time for a place to become home. And within the first 3 years, if you can get the family to feel at home, and the 4 things that I mentioned, if they can get those things to like a stable place, I think we have a much better chance of having a successful church plant.
I had this thought just came to mind. I had another missionary tell me one time. He said the first 2 weeks, this works for long-term church planting or long-term missions. He said the first 2 weeks you're gonna be excited. It's amazing. I can't believe it. Look at this.
Look at that restaurant.
Said, that's right.
Cool.
That's so close to our house. And then he said the 2 months in, you'll be completely overwhelmed. Yeah. Because you haven't fully transitioned, but you realize your new reality.
Where are all the people?
And then he said, if you make the right decisions, 2 years in, it can feel like home.
Yeah.
And so I've appreciated your emphasis, whether it's on our phone calls or when we gather together and we say, what are the things we're going to talk about? It's not just, how do you grow your church, or how do you preach, or how do you I'm making something up. How do you get community groups up and running? It really is, spiritual soul care and health of particularly the senior leader, but the staff, because if the staff is healthy and the senior leader is healthy, then by the grace of God, the church is going to be healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're not that's the piece about this is I said I was an entrepreneurially minded earlier, right? And there is an organizational aspect to what we are doing. You are leading an organization in Winston-Salem, right? But you didn't start a Chick-fil-A here, right? That would have been easier and you'd have more money, right? But so there is a soul compartment or a soul aspect to it that is important that we must not forget. We're following the pattern in Scripture that God calls people. He calls usually individual leaders, and He establishes under those leaders a people that are there to bless the nations.
Yes,
right. And so we're still doing that same thing. And so we're following these leaders, and we're trying to make sure that we take care of them, so that not just take care of the organization, but we take care of them holistically, so that their walk with God, their family's relationship with God, so that then they can pastor a group of people in order to make much of God.
That's right.
So I think that's really important.
Let's talk about the values of Summit Collaborative. We've kind of danced around them a little bit here, but I know you and your team and all of us, we've thought hard about what are going to be the values, the words, the phrases, the ideas that are going to bring us together. And in fact, I know that not perfectly, but in part, even this conference is a reminder. Hey, Pastor JD is going to talk about this value, and Brian Lewis is going to talk about this value. I think it'd be helpful because we can't value everything. We value a few things. We actually, one of the things I've really appreciated is the fairly wide big tent that the Summit Collaborative can fit under. In other words, every church you go to doesn't exactly feel like every other church. Not every church is going to, I'm not even talking about size-wise. I'm just talking about like some even of the philosophy of ministry or the preaching styles or even the overall vision of where that church is exactly headed. Talk about how you build a network like that. Give us the values and maybe even a little bit of what you hope is going to happen at this conference with those values.
So our DNA or our distinctives have historically been gospel, balance, multiplication. At this point, in a renewal of that DNA, we're now saying gospel, balance, growth, and multiplication. That's something that we're still working on and rolling out, and people are going to be, the lead pastors will hear that in 48 hours.
Yeah, this
is not posted until then, so
right.
This is not a leak or anything. So those things are really important. They were given to me, gospel, balance, and multiplication, but they're actually very true of the collaborative. It's interesting that you said it's a big tent, because I don't think everybody would call us a big tent. But we definitely operate with an openness of a big tent. But like, you know where the tent pegs are.
Yeah, that's right.
So these are 4 tent pegs, right?
Give us the yeah.
Gospel. The gospel is not just the diving board, it's the pool.
Yes.
The gospel is the power for salvation and sanctification. If you remove the gospel from any of our ministries, it has lost all power.
Yes.
That's how every single collaborative church will operate. I was having a call with a bunch of lead pastors the other day talking about some of this, and I was asking them a question about what they thought the distinctives were without giving them the words.
Yeah.
And I said, if a lot of us will, if somebody in our church is moving to another city where there is a collaborative church, we would say, you should go to that church. You should at least try it out. Hear me out. It won't be exactly like our church.
Yeah.
The leader is going to be different. The city is different. You might not end up there, but I know this about that church. This is what the lead pastor said. I know this about that church. That church will get the gospel right.
That's right.
Peg number 1, and it's probably the center peg. I don't know
absolutely.
how a tent works with 4 pegs. And
I mean,
one's in the center,
the pastor who had the vision to plant 1,000 churches did write a book called Gospel.
Yeah. So there's one of them.
So there
right?
it is. Yes.
So gospel is number 1. Balance is number 2. This is the one where it's like it feels like a big tent, but we definitely are. I mean, there's a clarity on the most important issues, and we're trying to write more and more of these down so we can be clear on those things. But there is also a humility and an openness among the leaders of the collaborative to hear someone expressing the gospel in a different way in their context, to not agree with it or not be doing that way, and to be okay still being in the room and being family. That's balance.
That's good.
JD more recently has called it tensions.
Yes.
Right? Like there are a lot of times the world tries to make seeming differences into contradictions or conflicts. And those tensions are not meant to be resolved. Those tensions are oftentimes meant to be lived with.
Yes, managed, yes. I mean, one of my hermeneutics in approaching Scripture, kind of interpreting, understanding Scripture, is if the Bible says 2 things that seem to contradict each other, I don't believe the Bible contradicts itself. I believe them both.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I think that's what I've appreciated. I want to go back to the other values, but I think when I think about the 4 values, what attracted me to the Summit Collaborative and why I've always felt at home is that tension between, like, I'll give a couple of them, the tension between deep and wide, and that's a big one. You know, we're going to go very, very deep. We're going to go wide. Some version of just biblical truth, cultural relevance, like those tensions.
Social engagement and biblical truth. I mean, it's kind of another way of saying that. Like,
yes.
All of our churches are going to care for their city, and the pain points in the city, they're going to like radically address them and care for them, and radically teach the Bible.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not one or the other.
Yeah, substance. These would be my categories, but substance and style.
Yeah.
Kids ministry, but deep investment in parents. Because I'm just telling you, I've been to both types of churches, and I don't mean to caricature and stereotype, but you have the church that just does kids ministry, and it's kind of real fun on Sundays, but they're not really equipping parents. Then I've been in the churches that say, oh no, we're a family integrated church. We don't even believe in kids ministry, and it's all, but they don't have anything for the kids on Sunday. And so I've just appreciated I guess it would be the both and, not either or mindset. And I think it's key to the Summit Church. I think it's key to the Summit Collaborative. And I would say humbly for us, I think it's been one of the keys. We're in more of a religiously lost city where people have had a lot of strange and sad experiences with churches. And a lot of times it's just they've been emphasizing just one thing. So, we've talked about Jordan Peterson before, but one of the things he talked about is ideology is overemphasizing one thing to the exclusion of everything else. It's an overly simplified version of something.
Yes.
And I've appreciated getting in the middle of it and saying, how do we do everything that Scripture says and not just get on one hobby horse or pet project or favorite passage?
Well, I mean, and now we're actually having it's hard at home to do this as well.
Yes.
Like our girls, my wife and I, when we're talking to them, they often get confused when we're trying to explain a particular issue to them, because it feels like to them we're saying, yes, this, and yes, this, but okay, so but that's wrong there. Don't take it that far. It's like it's hard to, in today's day and age, to teach your kids or your church to be balanced in different ways. The world continues to try to force us to pick extremes. I was actually listening to JD. He was talking to a bunch of church planters at a conference that I went with him to, and he was talking about deep and wide, and he actually paused for a minute and he gave him like true JD, and he was like, some of y'all are getting frustrated with me right now because you feel like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, and I am. Quit picking sides if you don't have to.
That's right. Yeah.
And I feel like the world makes so balanced. That's the second page.
Well, and one other thing on that, it's interesting. So we don't need to get into a whole conversation on politics, but it's interesting. I think what a mentor told me about politics is true about dealing with these issues. He said, sometimes when you bring up something that's controversial, people are not listening to learn. they're listening to see what side you're on.
Yeah.
And that's deep. And so it's like you can't even, this is so sacred over here that you couldn't even say, well, this could possibly also go with this. These two things we can actually be a very deep teaching, Bible teaching church and be accessible to the brand new believer and the nominal Christian and the seeker and skeptic. And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, give us the last two.
But one more thing on that. It's also really hard. It takes, I'll go back to the strong leaders that we have in the collaborative. It takes a really stable, like self-stable, like I am okay with myself, I'm okay with God leader, and strong, disciplined, tried leader in order to be able to live in that space, to not be forced to one extreme or the other. So I think the quality of leader that we're developing in the collaborative makes it possible for someone to walk out that balance.
Yeah.
Gospel, balance, growth.
Let's do it.
All right. Andrew, our friend, how many times are we going to mention Mercy Hill? He says you can't, you can grow without going, but you can't go without growing.
Yep.
So, and we're ascending, multiplying, collaborative, and so we want to see our churches grow. We want to see our churches grow in terms of disciples being made and the depth of their walk with God to be growing.
Yes.
We want to see the number of people that are in our churches growing. We want to see the number of people that are baptized growing. Why? Because the mission is too great and the mission is still here.
Yes.
And so we're kind of unapologetically for that. We want to see our churches growing.
And yes, and that's been something I think that we become, I don't want to speak for you, but more explicit about, like you said, probably in the last few years. I think there's probably been, I'm not saying with any one person in our collaborative or anything, but there can sometimes be, people can be afraid to talk about growth.
Yeah.
Like there can be an ickiness with it sometimes. And so for me, the categories I've used, very similar to what you're saying, is I've used, and I think they're very biblical, numerical, spiritual, and then organizational growth. So if you think about it, Acts 2, Pentecost, this is what the seeker-sensitive church loves. Everyone's coming to faith in Christ, big numbers. Okay, well, that's growing numerically. And the church grows numerically three ways. A church grows numerically when people from a different church come to your church, transfer growth within cities. Churches grow numerically when people move from a different city to your city, and they decide to be a part of your church, you know? And what's interesting about that is one of the greatest ways to tell, usually, not always, the fastest growing churches in America are often in the fastest growing cities in America, of course. And then the third way that a church grows numerically is people are not just transferred from other cities and other churches, but from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. So there's Acts 2, there's numerical growth. Then there's spiritual growth. That's what, the John Mark Comers love, which is the end of Acts 2. Which is reading your Bible, committed to the apostles' teaching, the breaking of bread, the sharing of needs, of sharing of goods, the praying of prayers. That's addictions broken, marriages healed, families reconciled, forgiveness given, people set on mission. And then the third way a church grows is organizationally, and to me that's Acts 6. That's widows. There's new problems. There's new pressures. New people need to take on new leadership. People need to be raised up. We need residencies. We need cohorts. We need collaboratives. And so I think for me, if I could just say this, I think I have felt more confident and comfortable talking about growth when it's not just, hey, we're not just talking about numerical growth. We're talking about the holistic growth of, which is what you're saying. I'm just using my words for it.
Yeah, and it works, all four pieces of the distinctives work together.
Yes.
I'm much more confident in saying your church needs to grow when also balance is one of our values.
Yes.
Because the thing is,
Well
you
said.
can be trying to have your church to grow, and it might not.
Yep.
Right? Because there are examples in the Bible of very faithful people who were trying to share the mission of God and move the mission forward, and it didn't happen.
No, I mean,
we have brothers and sisters living overseas who labor for years trying to have the kingdom grow, and they have one person come to faith, and we celebrate over that, right?
Some people get the Isaiah ministry, which is preached to a people who will never believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so we can say we want your church to grow, and if your church doesn't, that doesn't mean you don't belong in the collaborative.
That's right. Yes.
Right? But we do want to see the mission go forward. And so it has to be something that we are clear about. And I really like the three different ways that you're talking about growth being able to happen there.
Tell me the last value, multiplication. So that balances all of the values, including balance. Go ahead.
So multiplication, if gospel's at the center, maybe multiplication's at the top. I don't know what this tent looks like at this point, but
it's a very messed up tent.
Yeah, it's a weird tent. But multiplication is not just church planting. We want our churches multiplying at every level, multiplying disciples, multiplying staff members, multiplying small group leaders, multiplying ministries, multiplying campuses, multiplying churches. And we've got to see all of it multiplying in order for the scaffolding not to fall down. And so what that means, if you're listening to this and you have not been leading in the church, you've not been we need you to get into the game.
Yeah.
Right? Because we need everything multiplying at every level so that we continue to reach people. JD talks about having a bias for the one. Like, I think there's something within the collaborative that we all feel that it's just, we want one more baptism.
Yes.
We want one more person coming to faith. We want one more marriage saved. We want more. Everybody has that story.
Yes.
I'm sure you have one. I have one on my heart of this girl in Wilmington that got baptized. We did a video, and she says, for all of my life, I thought that religion was about what I could do for God. And now I know that Christianity is about what God did for me.
Gospel.
One more.
Yes. Powerful.
One more.
Powerful.
And we have to have, the reason we multiply is because of the mission. And we need everybody multiplying. We need everybody in that process in order for us to reach that one more.
Yes.
Maybe that one more is your sister or your cousin or your neighbor.
I love it.
Or somebody across the seas that we don't even know yet.
Well,
but that's what
at our church, we say, who's that one person who's far from God and close to you, just to kind of create that image in our mind, as well as...
That's what I say too.
That's right. And we talk about taking personal risks to bring Christ to every relationship. So very similar language. And what's interesting as we kind of bring this to a close is you talk about multiplication. I don't even know if you and I have talked about this at length, at least, but we just launched a 16-month cultural initiative that our church will be very familiar with, who's listening, if they're in our church, called Multiply. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, in me studying that word, that phrase, obviously multiplication, same idea. It's literally, I know you know this, but it is God's first word to humanity. I mean, there is not, literally God creates it. The first thing that God speaks to humanity is the word multiply. Now, this is what's so powerful too. I think it's powerful. It's first a blessing, not a command.
Oh yeah.
So it's later a command, but it's actually a blessing to be a part of getting to multiply. And then it's not only that, it's re-given to Noah. Yeah. So the other encouraging thing about multiplication is multiplication was not given to perfect people. It was at first. It was given to Adam and Eve. Yeah. But even the call to Noah and his sons, as messed up as we find out that they are as soon as we get to Genesis chapter 9, they're called to multiply. So anyway, I'm super excited as we close. I want to hear, what are you, as you look to the future, maybe you don't want to give too much away about the collaborative, but as you do look to the future, what are some of the things, maybe we start with this conference and beyond, what are your hopes, dreams, vision for the future of the Summit Collaborative?
I think that in the next 10 years, we won't be one collaborative, we'll be 10 collaboratives. So as we continue to scale and we want to continue to be a family and continue to be small, I think we need to be a network of networks, because in order for this to continue to work the way that it is, what we see even in our churches is that as you get larger, you've got to get smaller in some way. You have this multiplication that is happening. And so we've got to take, I'll say it this way, instead of having one church planting center, we need to have 10 church planting centers. Because when we have 10 church planting centers, we have 10 times the capacity in order to plant churches that are gospel-centered, they're balanced, they're growing, and they're focused on continued multiplication.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm excited. I'm excited that you're here for the next couple of days. I'm excited to see, I've been texting with some church planners. Again, this is Tuesday before the conference starts on Wednesday. And I mean, guys are bringing their whole teams. Guys are renting out Airbnbs and staying in Winston for 3 or 4 nights. I'm getting texts, what's the good restaurant? We're excited to be spending time getting everyone together for some pizza the one night together. I just think there's going to be, like all events like this, we never know genuinely, with 500 people there, we don't know the thousands of things that God is going to do and what God is going to stir. So thank you, man. Thanks for taking time in your busy schedule to come on down here to help come alongside our staff and our team to pull this conference off. And I just can't wait to see what God's going to do this weekend. I appreciate it, man. Yeah. Hey, thank you guys for listening in. I hope that you guys, if you're interested, will look up the Summit Collaborative. You can just Google that. You can see all of the different churches that we've already planted as a collaborative. And I just want to say at Two Cities Church, we want to continue to plant churches that plant churches. And maybe one day we'll be one of those collaboratives. Thanks.